guys, it's Maya, and today I will be showing you how to make these quote-unquote color block bugle bead wire rings. These rings are honestly kind of niche because the beads that they require are a little bit specialized, but if you're interested in making these types of rings, feel free to continue watching. I think they're really cool and they add a nice pop of color to potentially an otherwise all silver or all gold ring stack. Also, and I'll talk a little bit more about this at the end of the video, so if you don't want to watch this, you can either skip ahead to the timestamp on the screen or wait until the end. But I just wanted to say that it has been a little while since my last video. I have graduated college. For a little bit of context, I started this channel back kind of during the pandemic era when I was in high school, and it blew up a little bit once I started college, which was really cool. But in college, socializing and doing P-sets kind of got in the way, so I kind of posted sporadically. But I thought, now that I've graduated college and I have a little bit more free time, potentially I could try and revamp this YouTube channel. So that is what this is. As with all of my videos, we're going to start with the materials that you'll need for this tutorial. First, we have pliers. This set of 3 is the set that I've been using since I started making wire jewelry, and I haven't really found need for much else. From left to right, we have flat nose pliers, round nose pliers, and then cutters. But out of the 3, I would say the most important pair that you would need is the middle pair, the round nose pliers, and that's just because they create the loops that I think are so important for a lot of wire jewelry making. And they can substitute a lot of the functionality of the flat nose pliers. And if you're really in a pinch, you can always use scissors for cutters, but I wouldn't recommend that because it might dull the blades of the scissors. Now we'll get into the wire that you'll need for this ring design. Generally, when wire wrapping, you need a thicker wire and a thinner wire for the details. So for this project specifically, I used a 16 to 18 gauge thick wire for the structure of the ring, and then a 26 to 28 gauge thinner wire for the details and the wire wrapping. Generally, I would lean on the thicker side for the wire used for the structure because it just gives the piece a little more integrity. Now I'll get into the beads that you'll need to create these rings. So this is a set of bugle beads that I purchased somewhere online, but you can get them at any sort of craft store. I just liked this set because it gave me 8 different colors instead of having to buy a whole bunch of just one color. I especially liked the green and the blue in the top left of this case. I believe these beads are maybe 3 to 4 millimeters long, but honestly it doesn't really matter how long the beads are, you just have to adjust the wire frame accordingly. Now, if you want to make the mushroom design that I showed a little bit earlier in this video, you will also need matching seed beads that are the same color as the bugle beads that you'll want to use for your wire ring design. Here I have a set of green seed beads that is essentially an exact match for the green bugle beads that I was using. So if you want to make the more intricate design color block rings, feel free to search for some seed beads that match. But if you just want to make the single colored rings, ignore this part. And the last thing that you'll need is a ring mandrel of some sort. I have a more official ring mandrel, and then here I'm just holding up a tube of mascara that happened to be the exact thickness of one of my fingers. So depending on what you have, honestly, I prefer the tube of mascara because it's round and the ring mandrel has a few gaps in it. So any sort of round object would work. Okay, so let's just get started with the first tutorial, which is the plain single colored wire ring that only requires the bugle beads. So as you can see, I've grabbed my 18 gauge wire that I'm going to use for the structure of the ring, and using the round nose pliers, I'm going to create a loop at the end of the 18 gauge wire. Don't cut any wire yet because I like to leave the cutting until the last possible minute when I have to, just so that I can save wire. So once you create a simple loop at one end of your wire, you're going to grab the ring mandrel of your choice. In my case, it's a mascara wand, and you're going to start wrapping the 18 gauge wire around the ring mandrel with the loop kind of lying parallel on the ring mandrel's surface. And you're going to continue wrapping the wire until the wire overlaps slightly with the loop that you just made. And once the two ends of the wire kind of meet, you're going to grab your flat nose pliers, and the first thing I do is kind of make sure that the loop is actually perpendicular to the the rest of the ring. And the second thing I do is kind of make sure that the curve fully goes around. It's hard to explain, but sometimes if I don't curve it enough, the end of the ring will kind of shoot off straight instead of curving, which I don't really want because I want the entire ring to be a full circle. So sometimes I curve the wire a little bit further than it has to be, just so that no flat part of the wire is visible. The next thing you're going to do is grab your flat nose pliers again and create a 90-degree bend where the end of your wire meets the loop. Immediately following that, you're going to create another 90-degree bend so that you now have two parallel pieces of wire running alongside each other. I kind of eyeballed this, but you can also use one of the bugle beads to measure exactly how thick you want your structure to be, which I find helpful, but I've just made a lot of these, so I can kind of eyeball it. Here, I'm just double checking. I'm taking one of the green bugle beads and putting it in between the two parallel tracks of wire just to make sure that I've approximated well enough. Now, there is always some variation in the length of these bugle beads, so it doesn't have to be too precise, but precise enough such that all the bugle beads fit inside. Now, as you can see, I'm just taking the ring mandrel once again and wrapping the other parallel side of wire around to match the curve of the first part. And then I'll just use my cutters to cut maybe 1/2 centimeter beyond where I want the wire to end, just so that I can use my round nose pliers to create a matching loop so that everything is nice and symmetric. If this is your first time doing the design, I would recommend just cutting a little bit more wire than you think you need, and then trimming off excess as needed, just so that you don't end up with too little wire and no way to reconnect the wire that you just cut off. And now here is just a whole bunch of footage of me fiddling with the structure until it looks perfectly symmetric. When you're first done with the structure, it will look kind of lopsided usually, so I'm just using the ring mandrel and my fingers to make sure that the two pads of wire are actually symmetrical and that everything is rounded, things like that. I'm also checking that it actually fits the finger that I want it to fit. Keep in mind that after you add the bugle beads, the size of the ring will shrink slightly from just the frame because the beads will take up a little extra space. So keep that in mind when you're figuring out how to size this ring. Okay, so now is the fun part, in my opinion. You're going to take your 26 or 28 gauge wire and cut off a really long piece of it. Now, this is always a point of contention for me because I want to cut off enough so that I don't have to stop and restart the wire in the middle of the ring, but I also don't want to cut off too much that it becomes cumbersome to work with. So you'll just have to kind of experiment with that. But in this video, I would approximate that I cut off maybe 2 to 3 feet of wire, and we'll see how that turns out when I finish this ring. But once you have your 28 gauge wire cut, you're going to start winding it around the closed end of the ring. So not the side with the loops, the side that's connected with the perpendicular wire. And you're just going to loop it around one of the parallel tracks of wire a couple of times to start, and leave a little bit of a tail just so that you have something to hold on to. Once you've wrapped the wire around a couple of times, you're going to find the end of your extremely long 28 gauge wire and thread on your first bugle bead. Once the bugle bead makes it all the way to the other end of the wire, you're going to fit it perfectly between the two parallel tracks of wire, and hopefully it fits if you made the structure big enough. Once the bugle bead is within the frame, you're going to continue wrapping your thinner wire around the other parallel track of wire. There's one small detail that you might want to pay attention to, which is that when you first start wrapping the wire around, it might not fit all the way in between the parallel track and the top of the bugle bead, so you might need to use either your fingernail or the pliers to nudge the 28 gauge wire in snug so that it's fitting between the bugle bead and the parallel track of 18 gauge wire, if that makes sense. Another thing that you might find helpful is to pinch together the several rounds of 28 gauge wire with your flat nose pliers just to make sure that they all kind of fit snugly together. In between each bugle bead, I wind the 28 gauge wire around the frame about 4 or 5 times. It kind of depends on the thickness of the wire you're using, the thickness of the frame, and the thickness of the bugle bead. So I would just experiment a couple of bugle beads at a time and see how many wire wraps you actually have to do in order for the bugle beads to lie together nicely. Here you can also see that I use my thumbnail to kind of push the 28 gauge wire more into the ring so that the bugle beads lie flatter next to each other. You'll see what I mean later in the video, but I find that that's also helpful to get the bugle beads lying next to each other. And now I'm going to grab another bead and slide it onto my absurdly long piece of 28 gauge wire and place it right next to the first bead. Once I'm happy with that bead's position, I start winding the wire around the opposite parallel track of the frame. So essentially, I think you're getting the idea here. It's just zigzagging across from parallel track to parallel track of the frame until I fill up the entire ring. So after about maybe 30 minutes of work, I'm done with half of the ring. And here you can see that it actually is never really that difficult to wrap the wire around the frame despite how long it is, because I left the ring open at the back. Instead of having to drag the entire 28 gauge wire through the ring, you can just wrap it around, which makes it much easier. That's why when I can, I try not to close the ring until I'm completely done wrapping it. Okay, so it turns out that my wire estimate from the beginning of this video was not exactly correct, and I actually only was able to finish about half of the ring with the amount of 28 gauge wire that I cut. So if you want to be a little bit better prepared than I was, you can cut maybe 4 feet of wire at the beginning, or if you find yourself running out, I usually just wrap the 28 gauge wire around the frame 3 times, cut off any excess, and then use the flat nose pliers to pinch down the edge of the 28 gauge wire until it's flush with the frame. This always requires a little bit of trial and error, and honestly I still haven't really figured out how to fully get the 28 gauge wire flush with the frame. That's honestly why, when possible, I prefer working with thicker wire because it holds its shape better. But in this case, the 28 gauge wire was the only one that fit through the bugle beads, so that is what I'm using. But once you get the 28 gauge wire flush with the frame, you're going to take your spool of wire and cut another maybe 2 to 3 feet of 28 gauge wire with your cutters, and then restart the process over again, but this time just from the middle of the ring. So now I would take your ring and find the place that you just cut the wire off from, and essentially use your new piece of 28 gauge wire as an extension of the old wire. I always leave a tail for my thumb to hold onto so that I can start wrapping, and then I would wrap maybe 2 to 3 more times before adding another bugle bead. If you recall, we wrapped the last piece of wire 3 times around the frame, and now we can wrap this new piece of wire 2 to 3 times around the frame so that we're still getting those 5 to 6 rounds with the 28 gauge wire, ensuring that the next bugle bead we put on the ring will fit closely next to its predecessor. And here we just keep on going. I grab another bugle bead, put it on the new piece of 28 gauge wire, and continue the zigzag pattern along the 2 parallel tracks of the structure. So I'll take this opportunity to sneak in a quick tip, because I recorded way too much footage of me just wire wrapping, which is not really that helpful. But as you can see, every time I complete a loop with the 28 gauge wire, I use my right index fingernail to push the loop as close as possible to the previous loops. And this solves a problem that I encountered early on when I first started making wire wrapped pieces, which is that a lot of my wire weaving just wasn't very neat. It looked kind of sloppy, and I think that was mainly because I wasn't using anything to push the loops of my wire weaving close together. So that's what I'm doing here. Some people like to use their flat nose pliers to push the loops of their wire weaving together, and I do that sometimes, but I find that with more malleable wire like 28 gauge wire, I don't need something as hard as pliers. Honestly, in general, I try to avoid using my pliers as much as possible because a lot of the wire that I work with is plated, and that plating can rub away if you use pliers too much on the wire. Obviously, this is something that I learned how to do over time, so I would say if you're first learning a specific design or a certain wire wrapping technique, use your pliers as much as possible, and then as you get more experienced, you can find places where the pliers aren't specifically necessary and you can use something like a fingernail or another surface to accomplish the same task. Alrighty, so it is many minutes later, but I've just put the last bugle bead onto my ring and I can't fit any more on, so now it's time to learn how to close the ring. So the first step to closing the ring is taking your 28 gauge wire and continuously wrapping all the way through the loop until you reach the other end of the ring. This is a little bit difficult to explain, so it might just be helpful if you watch what I'm doing. But once I reach the base of the loop and I can't keep on wrapping, I start wrapping the 28 gauge wire through the loop. As you can see, I'm poking it through the loop and pulling it back out. This part is almost like sewing, so if you know how to sew, this will be kind of familiar to you. But essentially, I continue to do this until I reach the edge of the loop that is parallel to the other side of the ring. Once I reach that point, as you can see, I'm going to take the other end of the 28 gauge wire and I'm going to poke it through the other end of the ring to connect the two ends. Now I'm going to do that maybe 3 to 4 times for each loop, just so that I can connect the two ends of the ring and I'm not scared of anything coming apart. I'm also realizing that it might be a little helpful to insert some sort of close-up of the closure of the ring, because I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I might do that, and you guys let me know if that is at all helpful. So once I've done 3 to 4 rounds of wire connecting the loop with the other side of the ring, I'm just going to wrap the wire around the other side of the ring, maybe for 5 to 6 rounds. I'll take a look at the close-up and maybe I'll draw some sort of illustration just to let you guys know exactly how many loops I do where, because I know it's a little bit difficult to see right now. And once I reach the second loop that I haven't connected with the other side of the ring yet, I'm going to do just that. I'm going to thread the 28 gauge wire through the loop and thread it through the other side of the ring to connect them. And now, once I'm done connecting the two ends of the ring, I'm just going to finish it off by continuing down the opposite side that I came up of the frame, if that makes sense. And then once I hit where I want to end, I simply snip off the excess 28 gauge wire and use the flat nose pliers to pinch down the wire until it's flush against the frame. I usually run my fingers across where I just closed the ring just to make sure that nothing is sticking out and might hurt someone, and then it's time to try on the ring, I guess. So I put it on and see how it fits with the added bugle beads. And I know I technically labeled what is the front and back of the ring, but honestly I think the little loops at the back can be kind of cute also, so if you want to move those to the front, that is also a possibility. Okay, so now it's part 2 of this tutorial where I show you how to make the more intricate version of the color block ring. If you've gotten what you wanted out of this tutorial, feel free to just click off, but if you're interested in learning how to make the slightly more interesting ring, feel free to continue watching. So the first thing I'm going to do, and actually I don't really know why I didn't do this in the first part of this video, but it's here now in case you want to pick up on this step. So I use a thing called a wire rounder. I'll put a picture of it on the screen, but essentially it's a burr type shape that will round the end of wire for you just so that it's not pointy and sharp. I honestly don't think it's that necessary for this design, which is maybe why I didn't do it at the beginning, but it's more important for things like if you're making earring hooks and you don't want it to poke people, that sort of thing. So up to you if you want to use it. I have it, so I guess I decided to use it for this design, but it's really not necessary. So, as with before, we make the frame. The steps for making the frame are honestly the exact same, so I might just fast forward through this bit. Okay, so once I'm done creating the frame and wiggling it around until I'm kind of satisfied with the general shape, I'm now going to pull out the beads that I will need. Because this is a little bit more of an intricate design, you're going to need both the bugle beads and the matching seed bead colors. In this case, I'm going with a background of light-ish blue. So I have my light blue seed beads and light blue bugle beads. And I'm also going to pull out the seed beads that I will be using for the design. In this case, I'm doing a sort of Minecraft mushroom inspired design, so I have red and white beads for the mushroom. I'll insert a graphic on the screen just to kind of show what the idea behind this ring is, because I think it's honestly a little abstract and a little difficult to see because it's on such a small scale, but hopefully the graphic will help. Like last time, we're going to cut a long piece of 28 gauge wire. In this case, I'm doing gold, so that is the wire color that I'm choosing. And again, if you want to try and make sure that you don't have to end the ring and restart halfway through with a new piece of 28 gauge wire, you might want to err on the side of caution and cut a bit of a longer piece of wire. We're also going to start this ring in the exact same way, which is to say that I take the 28 gauge wire and, leaving a little bit of a tail, I start winding it around one end of the closed end of the ring. I know that what I just did on screen was not exactly on screen, it was actually very off screen, so go to this timestamp if you would like a closer look of it when I did it the first time. For now, I'm just starting to thread on my bugle beads, same start as last time. Again, you can go back to part 1 of the tutorial if you would like a better look at what I'm doing on screen, because I guess I forgot I was recording and simply did not look at the viewfinder when I was recording this part. Again, we're going to do 4 to 5 rounds of wire wrapping in between each segment of bead. Now that I have 3 bugle beads on the ring so far, I'm going to start using our seed beads. Based on the graphic that I showed earlier, we are going to need 2 background colored seed beads at the top, 1 white or red seed bead in the middle, and then 1 background seed bead at the bottom. With the design in mind, I'm just going to start putting the seed beads on the wire in the order that I specified, making sure that I pay attention what is the quote-unquote top and bottom of the ring. In my experience, some of the seed beads might actually be a little bit different in size depending on, I guess, where you bought them. So in this case, all 4 beads didn't fit perfectly on the ring. They were a little bit too long in total. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and swap out one of the red beads that I'm using with a slightly smaller one just so that everything fits. And now, as you can see, everything fits perfectly. The next step in this process is actually to get a dish to put all your seed beads in, which I evidently did not, which is why my wire is whipping all over the place and getting the seed beads everywhere. But besides that, the next step is to just continue the pattern. So as a reminder, I'll put it up again, and the next row is going to look a little bit different. It's going to be still the left side of the mushroom, but the entire row is essentially going to be the mushroom. Here we're going to alternate white, red, white, red. The first white bead is going to be the stem of the mushroom. The red ones are going to be the main color of the mushroom, and then the second white bead that we put on is going to be a white dot in the middle of the mushroom, if that makes sense. Once I confirm that all 4 beads fit nicely on the ring, I'm going to continue the process where I left off, which is wrapping the 28 gauge wire 4 to 5 times around the frame. Now we're going to create the other half of the mushroom. This time we're going in with 3 red seed beads followed by a single white seed bead for the stem of the mushroom. And as you can see here, I'm running into a spacing issue again. I think one of the middle red beads is a little bit too thick, or could be thinner. So I'm dumping out a whole new batch of red beads and trying to find a smaller one so that all 4 beads fit well within the frame. And now they fit, so I'm going to continue with my 4 to 5 rounds of wire around the frame, followed by the rest of the design. The last part of this design is first a background colored seed bead, a single mushroom colored seed bead, and then 2 more background colored seed beads. And with that, the first mushroom is complete. I can now continue wrapping a couple of times before doing maybe 3 more bugle beads, and then starting on another mushroom. I will take this opportunity to put all of the different mushroom designs on the screen. I'm pretty sure they're all just mirror images of each other, so there honestly isn't that much interesting stuff going on, but you can see that sometimes I vary the position of the white dots within the mushroom. I sometimes include just 1 or maybe 2, depending on my mood, so really you can just mix and match all of these different designs depending on what you prefer. I won't make you watch this again, but in this case, I also ran out of 28 gauge wire, as in I cut the initial piece of wire a bit too short, so I'm going to have to end that piece of wire and cut a new piece to finish off the ring. If you would like to see that process in a little more detail, feel free to go to the following timestamp on the screen, but for now, let's just pretend that I cut the perfect amount of string at the beginning and don't actually have to do this. Alrighty, so an hour of footage later, I am done making the beaded part of this ring, and now I'll show you guys how to close it. Honestly, I might just skip over this footage because it's the exact same closing process as the previous ring, so I'll put the timestamp for that up on the screen. But yeah, essentially you just weave in the 28 gauge wire and connect the 2 ends of the ring so that they close snugly. I actually just thought of this, but you don't actually have to close this ring. I'm not really sure why I didn't think of this before, but I know a lot of people are fans of adjustable rings, which I do think are really useful, especially for people who may not know their ring size or maybe in between sizes, things like that. I personally tend to stay away from adjustable wire rings because I think it compromises the integrity of the ring itself, like it makes it easier to break or misform, things like that. But you can definitely just completely leave out this closing step and leave the 2 ends of the ring separated so that it can be a bit more adjustable. And I think that's a perfectly good option. I'm just showing you how to close it, and in my opinion, it makes the ring a little stronger and a little more durable, but that is completely up to you. Alrighty, and that is this tutorial all complete. Here is, oh, I guess I'm pulling out all of the rings that I made recently in this style. But yeah, here is the ring that I just made. I like to think of this mushroom design as kind of like the mushrooms in Minecraft. I don't actually know if that is accurate, but I did go through a Minecraft phase during the pandemic, so that is probably where this idea came from. I think it's really cute, even if it doesn't look too much like mushrooms. I think the colors are still really cute, and this type of design offers a whole bunch of different options for other potentially 4x4 designs that you could make. I don't know, I'll think of something and I'll get back to you on that. But for now, mushrooms is the only design that I've figured out. These rings are a little bit inspired by seed bead embroidery. I'm not sure if that's what they're called, but I'll put pictures up on the screen. They have honestly been kind of trendy recently, which is funny because I recorded this video in 2022, but I did do a little bit of seed bead embroidery back during the pandemic and before that when I was experimenting with different mediums of jewelry making. So that's a little bit on the origin of this ring. And yeah, that's it for this video. I'll stop yapping now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.